Of all the phenomena in the known universe, human consciousness presents the strangest paradox. It is the most intimately familiar aspect of our daily lives, yet it remains scientifically inexplicable. Historically, some scholars argue that consciousness, as we understand it today, is a relatively recent development. According to this theory, early humans during the Homeric era, the time of the Trojan War, did not actually experience themselves as unified internal subjects. It was only over centuries of cultural and philosophical evolution that humanity made an inward turn, developing the reflective, subjective view of the self that we now take for granted. By the late 19th century, early psychologists attempted to map this inner world systematically through introspection. They immediately hit a wall. While they could categorize the reports of human experience, they could find no physical link between the irritation of nervous tissue in the brain and the emergence of a conscious subjective state. This failure led to a drastic pivot. In the 20th century, the rise of behaviorism caused psychology to abandon consciousness entirely, focusing strictly on observable third-person data. Today, the problem is back. As modern cognitive science maps the brain with exacting precision, we are forced to ask exactly where the subjective mind fits within a purely physical nature. We have mapped the genome, split the atom, and tracked the firing of neurons. Yet the divide between third-person measurement and first-person experience remains the greatest unresolved anomaly in science. To understand why the mind defies measurement, we must first define objective third-person data. This consists of measurable physical facts, neural maps, chemical equations, and acoustic wavelengths. This data chart displays a continuous, repeating waveform representing measured physical frequencies. Using instruments, we can perfectly track the physical frequency of a sound wave and pinpoint its exact neurological impact on the auditory cortex. The brain extracts these data points and makes them structurally available for the organism to use, guiding behavior, storing memories, and triggering reflexes. Philosophers refer to this functional wiring as access consciousness. But mapping this functional architecture leaves something out. The actual feeling of the event escapes our structural measurements entirely. This missing component is phenomenal consciousness, the actual lived qualitative structure of an experience. A computer processing acoustic data has access to information, allowing it to trigger a warning light. A human hearing a siren has a raw, sensory feel of the noise that accompanies the physical processing. Objective physical data is intrinsically incomplete. It maps the machinery of thought, but it is permanently blind to the subjective reality of the mind. This blindness becomes obvious when we try to prove the existence of phenomenal consciousness across different species or systems. In 1974, philosopher Thomas Nagel established a baseline criterion. A creature is conscious if there is something that it is like to be that creature. Human scientists can measure the precise physics and neurology of a bat's echolocation. We know the exact frequencies emitted and the neural pathways those echoes stimulate in the brain. However, that objective data cannot tell us what it is actually like to perceive the physical world through biological sonar. Nagel defines this boundary as epistemic subjectivity. There is an absolute limit on our ability to understand certain facts from outside a specific internal point of view. Third-person objective science is strictly closed to these first-person facts. We can trace the complete chain of physical causes that produce an experience without ever grasping the internal character of the experience itself.
If facts about experience can only be understood from the inside, then the physicalist claim that all facts in the universe are objective physical facts is false. To test the absolute boundaries of physical information, philosophers use the knowledge argument. Frank Jackson proposed a thought experiment called Mary's Room. Imagine Mary, a super scientist who lived her entire life in a room with only black and white monitors. Inside this room, Mary acquires complete mastery of the physical facts of color vision. She knows the exact wavelengths of light, the optics of the eye, and the neurological processing of the visual cortex. Then, Mary is released. She walks outside, sees the color red for the first time, and learns something entirely new. She realizes her comprehensive physical data was incomplete. John Locke pointed out a similar limit using the raw sensory feel of tasting a ripe pineapple. You can memorize the precise thermodynamic process of sucrose bonds dissolving in water. That chemical data cannot simulate the taste of sweetness on the tongue. These intrinsic, private, raw sensory feels are known as qualia. The philosopher Joseph Levine coined a term for our inability to connect the physics to the feeling, the explanatory gap. There is no intelligible logical step to get from the physical chemistry of a neuron to the subjective experience of a quale. Because physical data cannot logically entail qualitative feeling, the mental world operates as an irreducible, permanently sealed private vault. To bridge this gap, some researchers propose the functionalist theory of mind, which argues consciousness is merely a byproduct of complex information processing and causal architecture. In 1720, G.W. Leibniz formulated the definitive critique of this functionalist approach, using the analogy of a mill. Leibniz asked us to imagine expanding a human brain to the massive size of a mill, so large that a person could walk inside it. An observer walking through this dense structure would only see mechanical operations, physical parts pushing and pulling other physical parts in complex sequences. Leibniz's conclusion was absolute. Nowhere in this vast mechanical system would the observer actually encounter a conscious thought or a subjective feeling. This leads to the absent qualia hypothesis. It is entirely possible to construct a functionally perfect mechanical replica of a human that processes information identically, but possesses zero internal phenomenal life. Philosophers define this theoretical entity as a philosophical zombie. Replicating the inputs, outputs, and causal architecture of a mind does not logically generate subjective experience. Without qualia, we are merely building empty machines. We are biological machines entirely composed of physical matter, yet we possess undeniable phenomenal experience. The stated physicalist mandate requires that microphysical facts, the behavior of atoms, cells, and physics, must determine all macroscopic reality. The existence of irreducible qualia breaks this causal closure. Subjective feelings exist, but they are not determined by the physics of the brain. The philosopher David Chalmers formalized this dead end as the hard problem of consciousness. This diagram visualizes the divide. Easy problems map brain functions, the active waveform. The hard problem is what remains when data runs out. Why does processing feel like anything inside? Mechanics will never bridge this explanatory gap. Until science can explain how objective matter gives rise to subjective feeling, consciousness remains an irreducible anomaly. It proves that our physical model of nature is drastically and perhaps permanently incomplete.